Panie i panowie, rozpoczynamy ostatnią część naszego dzisiejszego spotkania. Swój referat przedstawi pan Vadim Altskan z Muzeum Holokaustu w Waszyngtonie, który prowadzi tam pracę w dziale archiwalnym, zajmuje się szerokim spektrum zagadnień z Europy Wschodniej. Natomiast dziś będzie mówił na temat Pozorny wybór przywódcy Judenratu w getcie w Szawlach na Litwie, lata 1941-1944. Panie dyrektorze, proszę bardzo.
Thank you very much. So after a short detour into exotic places like Bosnia and Croatia, we're making sharp U-turn back to historic lands of Rzeczpospolita. I'm talking about Lithuania, and I believe I'm the only one who is talking about this country, which is a very important country despite its size. And the subject of my presentation, which is, I'm trying to be short, I understand it's the last one, and only survivors are here. It has to do something with a famous Polish resilience. In my country, everybody by now would be already walking home. So keeping this in mind, I will try to shorten my presentation. And if you have any questions later on, we can talk, and we can also touch some issues during discussion part of this presentation. So it's the subject I'm going to deal with is a history of Szawlach ghetto. I'm using a Jewish Yiddish name for this town, which is also known under its Lithuanian name, Siauliai, but I will be referring in my presentation using Yiddish name for this town. So the title is Choiceless Choice, and I'm going to talk about leadership of a Jewish council, Judenrat, in Szawlach ghetto. The term choiceless choice, as you probably know, was coined by Professor Lawrence Langer in reference to critical decisions made by individuals during the Holocaust. It defines a choice between, and I'm quoting him, Professor Langer, one form of abnormal response and another, both imposed by a situation that was in no way of victim's own choosing. He applied this term, of course, to individuals. I'm going to apply the same term to a group of individuals. Jewish self-government, which is in Holocaust historiography and documents, is more commonly known as Judenrat, Jewish Council. We're talking about Szawlach ghetto, and my objective is to examine role of the leadership during the most trying time of this ghetto during the most trying times in the Jewish history. Let me emphasize in the very beginning that the social political conditions under which Szawlach ghetto was established were in many ways similar to other ghettos in Lithuania or German-occupied Europe. Nonetheless, the Szawlach ghetto went into history as one of the longest surviving ghettos in Lithuania. I think the only Łódź ghetto, which was liquidated in August 1944, survived a little bit longer. In addition to its prolonged preservation, the residents of the Szawlach ghetto never suffered from extreme hunger. I'm not saying there was no starvation in the ghetto the way how it was in Warsaw ghetto and many other ghettos. And there were also no mass epidemics at the scale as we know in other ghettos. So what was so different in the case of Szawlach ghetto? What was the vital factors in the ghetto's prolonged preservation? Did ghetto leaders play any role in preventing the destruction of the ghetto? And finally, did Judenrat's decision matter at all? Here one can say and argue, and would be completely right, that the fate of Jews in Szawlach or any other ghetto in the occupied Europe was sealed from the moment when ghetto was established, regardless of its leader's strategy or tactics. Those who imprisoned Jews, and by those I mean Germans and their allies, in ghettos always controlled their destiny and determined their ultimate fate. Those effectively undermining any efforts of the Jewish Council or options of individual Jews to resist German oppression. It is true that choiceless choice gives no viable alternatives. However, it does, under certain circumstances, and in my opinion, enables people who are willing to act to take actions. The leaders of the Jewish community of Šavlai choose to act and to stand up for the dignity and human values during the time when these principles were at the lowest point. Throughout the entire existence of the Šavlai ghetto, they continued to believe in what Primo Levi called, it's a quote from his book, the business of living is the best defense against death. So in my presentation, I'm going to talk about, it's divided into three parts. Part number one is a short overview of the Šavlai Jewish community, history of the Šavlai Jewish community. Then we're going to talk about mass killings of Jews in Šavlai and establishment of the ghetto. It's the first phase of the history of the Jewish ghetto. And finally, about life in Šavlai ghetto and role played by the Jewish Council. I know it sounds like a three-hour presentation. I will try to be very short. So first, few words about the history. The destruction of the ghetto in July of 1944 and deportation of inmates to concentration camps in Germany marks the tragic end of more than 200 years of the Jewish history in Šavlai. Since its establishment in mid-18th century, it numbered only a few hundred residents, but community grew into almost 10,000 members by the beginning of 20th century, representing about 58% of town's local population. This quick development of the Jewish community mirrored economic development, of course, of the city and the whole region in the second half of 19th century. It has to do, of course, as you know, from our common history, Russian history, with the reign of Alexander II and his reforms, which in Šavlai and in the entire northwestern region of Lithuania were reflecting in construction of major railroads, harbor. So this development of infrastructure of the entire region brought many Jews from neighboring regions to Šavlai. I will mention only one because we don't have time. One person whose factory played very important role in later days, century later, half a century later, when we were talking about Šavlai ghetto. It's a factory, tannery actually, leather factory, established in 1879 by Chaim Frankel, who originally came from Latvia. And his factory, within a very short period of time, became major employer of the city. Most of their employees, from workers to managerial level, were Jews, and his factory became major contractor for Russian army, making boots. So we're talking about at least 1,400 Jews who were employed by this factory. So it was a major enterprise, industrial enterprise of the city. In addition to it, of course, you have trading houses, you have banks, you have traditional Jews whose occupation was, of course, craftsmen. They have shops. So it's all very typical for Lithuania, for Russian Pale of settlement. The development of this region and city, of course, was interrupted by First World War. Like all other Lithuanian Jews, Litvaks, Jews of Šavlai were deported to Russian interior by Russian army. They managed to return back to their homeland only at the end of First World War. And when they came back, they found themselves in a completely new and very different political environment, linguistic environment. They were citizens, by now, citizens of a new country called Republic of Lithuania. They had to learn new language, and to the great surprise of their Lithuanian neighbors, they did this rather quick, fast, and the younger generation, especially younger generation, people who were in their teens and early 20s, managed to learn a language. They didn't assimilate, this is very important to emphasize. They continued to live within their own community. But in terms of integration, this was probably one of the best examples in Eastern Europe due to early policy of Lithuanian government with a cultural autonomy and many other factors which played a role. It was also a very small country. So during interwar period, in addition to integration, also Jews continually occupied predominant positions in local economy, despite all efforts of Lithuanian government to suppress this Jewish positions in favor of Lithuanian industrialists. So, of course, it all comes to end with invasion of Soviet Red Army, occupation of Lithuania, which not only destroyed all Jewish institutions which were established during interwar period, and I'm talking about schools, hospitals, political parties, Jewish clubs, but also deported many prominent Jews to Siberia along with their Lithuanian neighbors. So this is end of interwar period, and I'm going to go quickly now through the first phase of Nazi occupation. So evacuation of the Soviet authorities from Šavlai began in the morning of June 22nd, which is the first day of war, of Nazi invasion into Soviet Union. A few hours later, Soviets left, and 4 days later, so German army entered Šavlai. By that time, persecution of Jews already started by local nationalists, local Lithuanian partisans, and within summer of 1941, similar to all other places in Lithuania, and actually Soviet Union, if we're talking about entire country, we're witnessing first wave of mass killings perpetrated by Einsatzgruppen, of course, but also with with a help provided by logistical help and also active participation of Lithuanian nationalist partisans. The next step, of course, is ghettoization. Like in any other place in Lithuania, Jews were concentrated in the ghettos. But in Šavlai, and this is very important, it had its own flavor or own kind of history. The Lithuanian local administration decided to get rid of all Jews who lived for centuries, as I just told you, in Šavlai, and with a small exception of highly skillful specialists who were working at Frankel factory. So this plan, as soon as Jewish community learned about this plan, and they learned this from local newspaper, Lithuanian newspaper, and also from conversations or rumors they overheard, they decided to go and approach their Lithuanian counterpart, intelligentsia. It didn't work, of course, because intelligentsia not any longer had any power or could have any influence in Šavlai. Then two representatives of the Jewish community, they're very important people, for our story, because later on they would be serving in Judenrat. One of them is Mendel Leibovich, local businessman, and Beryl Khartoum, banker, head of the Volksbank, Jewish bank in Šavlai. They were sent to discuss this issue with vice burgomaster of town, Lithuanian, by name Stankus, whose portfolio included Jewish affairs. He immediately rejected plan offered by these two Jewish representatives to keep Jews in town, saying that he cannot overrule what has already been planned. And the plan was to send all Jews, with exception of small number, 20, 25 people and their families, to a town called Żagary, which is 70 kilometers west of Szawlach, where big ghetto for local Jews from Żagary, which had its own Jewish community, and Szawlach Jews would be created. So community was fearing that this is a prelude for total destruction. This is why they actually went to Lithuanian administration. But Lithuanians, as I already said, rejected this plan. And the only option remained for the Jewish community was to go and address this issue with German military commandant. So 3 people who were fluent in German went to see military commandant, and to their great surprise, they managed quickly, relatively quickly, to convince him personally that it would be better if Jews would stay in Szawlach. So he immediately issued an order for establishment of the ghetto, and Lithuanian administration reluctantly had to accept this order. So on August 15, Szawlach Jews started moving into the ghetto located in the area called Kafkas. It's a flat city, but there is a little hill across from Frankel factory, so it was called Kafkas, like mountain. But it's a really small area, and it could only accommodate a relatively small number of people. So when representatives of the Jewish community, there is no Jewish council, there is no Judenrat yet, because there is really no ghetto. When they realize that everybody will be squeezed into this very small area, they immediately, again, approached Lithuanian administration, and this time they were successful. So second ghetto across the street, called Traku, because this is the name of the street, main street of the ghetto, was established. So in Szawlach, we have 2 ghettos, but unlike Vilna or any other places, this is not a ghetto for productive and non-productive members of the community. Both ghettos had mixed population, old people, young people, productive, so there is really no differentiation between these 2 groups. So we're talking about 5,500, 6,000 Jews who moved into 2 ghettos in the summer of 1941. As I said, these 2 ghettos were basically 300 meters apart, separated by main street of the city, Vilnius Street. But walking from one ghetto to another without special permission or escort of Jewish police was basically prohibited. Lithuanian police guarded the entrance to both ghettos, while newly formed Jewish order police secured internal perimeters of both ghettos. Like many other ghettos in German-occupied Eastern Europe, Szawlach ghetto survival strategy was based on its ability to produce and provide necessary services for local economy as well as for German warfare. The manufacturing process and economy of Szawlach region could not function without sufficiently trained workers. Jews played vital roles in Szawlach pre-war economy. They were represented in large number among blue-collar workers, business managers, bankers, and various professionals. The largest local enterprise, I already mentioned it several times, Frankel tannery and shoe factory. In addition to tanneries, there was also a shoe factory, as well as other leather enterprises before World War II employed more than 1,000 of Jewish workers and professionals. During the war, due to its proximity to the ghetto and great demand for qualified workforce, Frankel factories played one of the most important roles in survival of the ghetto by employing the largest contingent of ghetto inhabitants. Immediately after German occupation, new Lithuanian authorities decided to dismiss all non-Jewish workers, but after a few weeks, it was clear that non-qualified workers cannot do anything, so Jews have to be rehired. And this was really, this really saved many, many families because employment meant life. And here I have to also, add that, of course, ghetto, Szawlach ghetto, like many other ghetto, went through the process of so-called selections. And it started even before ghetto was established, but continued during the first few weeks of ghetto existence. So the idea was to eliminate, of course, as we know, non-productive members of the community, old people, children. So Judenrat, which was already established at that time, and it's very important here to emphasize that unlike in many other ghettos, Judenrat, Jewish Council, in Šavli ghetto was not appointed neither by Lithuanian nor by German authorities. It was elected by the Jewish community. And this is really important for the whole history of Šavli ghetto. So they try to, of course, to help people. Through personal connections, they managed to get several hundred additional certificates, which were given to people who were hiding or old people. But nevertheless, community lost during selection process several hundred members. Šavli ghetto, like many Šavli Jews, like many other Jews who survived first wave of massacres in 1941, found another reason to hope when they entered ghetto. As soon as they learned about first defeats of the German army on the Eastern Front. From this point on, Jews considered time, in addition to productive work, to be their strongest ally in the struggle for survival. Winning time was vital. The longer ghetto would be able to prolong its existence as functional and productive entity, the more residents of the ghetto would be able to stay alive and see the day of liberation. This logical equation became backbone of the survival strategy of the Judenrat in Šavli. The head of the Jewish police, Ephraim Gens, younger brother of Jakub Gens, who was the head of Vilna ghetto, put this, and I'm quoting him, he basically was using Shakespeare quote, from Hamlet, saying, the question was to be or not to be. To be meant to carry out struggle for our existence while hoping for the victory or liberation. The alternative meant death without weapons and resistance under the heavy boot of drunk Nazi soldier. It would be death without any purpose or meaning. So this was a philosophy of Jewish leadership of the Šavli ghetto, expressed by member of the Jewish Council, head of Jewish Order Police, Ephraim Gens. I have a few minutes left, so I will briefly describe what Jewish Council did. And again, it was not something different or unique in terms of organization. You have, of course, hospital established in the ghetto because this was very important due to epidemics, proximity of German hospital. They knew what happened in Kaunas, where as soon as Germans discovered epidemics, they burned Jewish hospital with patients and doctors inside. So to avoid this, the first thing which ghetto administration did, they established Jewish hospital. It was established, of course, on the premises of Hevra Kadisha, the Jewish cemetery, the part which deals with, building where dead bodies were purified before being buried, but this was not really a major obstacle. The obstacle was to find equipment, and it all happened very quickly. So all community got together, everybody knew somebody on the Aryan side, brought necessary equipment. The second thing, of course, they tried to do is to open school for children, because parents went to work, children remained, and they had nothing to do. So they tried twice to establish school. Once in 41, it didn't really work well. Teachers didn't receive necessary certificates. Second time, it worked better, so the school was established, and it functioned for a very short time, but nevertheless, this was a really important program for children. It brought some kind of hope and light into their lives. Another important, I mentioned in the beginning, there was no starvation in the ghetto, but of course there was always shortage of food and food supplies. And in the beginning, of course, it was possible to smuggle food, but later on it became very difficult. So there were many, many issues, internal issues and internal tensions between Jewish police and residents of the ghetto who were trying to smuggle food, illegally, of course, to the ghetto, sometimes for their own needs, but also to sell on the black market. So many complaints, which we can later on find in documents and testimonies, it's about brutality of Jewish police. But we have a testimony of the head of the Jewish police who justified his acts by saying that what he did was very important because he needed to restrain people bringing food because they were endangering life of an entire community. Again, you know, I hope we have time for discussion. I will just read conclusion, which is, you know, few seconds, and then I will end my presentation. In few words, what I'm trying to do, and I have to probably explain in the very end, this is part of a much larger project about history or biography of Ephraim Gans, or maybe the whole Gans family, who are originally from Šavlai. So this is just a small sub-chapter or chapter of a larger project. So my conclusion about Jewish Council, or activities of the Jewish Council in Šavlai, well, as we know, the ultimate goal of Jewish Council to preserve the ghetto and save its residents was not accomplished. Nevertheless, Council succeeded in its efforts to prevent the destruction of the ghetto as long as it could. Šavlai ghetto survived longer as any other ghetto in Lithuania. By and large, the prolonged period of a relatively peaceful existence of Šavlai ghetto was possible because of its leader's ability to negotiate with local authorities. This interaction excluded any attempt of open disobedience or disregard to the orders given to Judenrat by local authorities, German or Lithuanian. Under these conditions, the Jewish Council and its members were left with only one option, that is to obey orders. Thus, the main challenge of the ghetto leaders in this situation was to carry out orders while trying to minimize harmful effects of this decrease to their community, sometimes by risking their own life. This was an extremely challenging task that required great organizational and negotiating skills. Why did prolonged survival of the Šavlai ghetto matter? As in all similar cases, delays in the liquidation of the ghetto and deportation of its residents to camps played a crucial role in the survival of these communities. The prevailing living conditions in the ghettos, despite its overcrowding, lack of food, and many other essential elements of normal life, were still better than in camps. In comparison with camps, in ghettos, Jews lived with their families, family units, and among fellow Jews. They were surrounded by familiar physical setting, and in many cases managed to maintain contacts with the world outside of the ghetto fence. As long as this environment remained stable, the Jews considered ghetto as a passing episode after which the days of freedom will return. The delay in liquidation of the ghetto also brought time for self-rescue efforts, such as escape, finding a hiding place outside of the ghetto, or acquiring false ID. And maybe most importantly, bearable living conditions in the ghetto allow Jews to maintain a minimum of psychological comfort and human dignity. And this perhaps is the main merit and achievement of the leaders of Šavlai ghetto. While the ghetto leaders did not demonstrate great heroism in the sense of physical battle of the ghetto, Warsaw Uprising, Vilna, they left a legacy of the great heroism of Jewish national responsibility. This heroism of responsibility played an instrumental role in eventual survival of many Jews from Šavlai. These people, directly or indirectly, owe their survival to the man who chose to stand at the helm of Šavlai Jewish community during the most trying time of its history. Thank you.
Bardzo dziękuję, panie dyrektorze. Pan Oleg Surovtsev z Państwowego Uniwersytetu w Czerniowcach przedstawi tekst dotyczący żydowskich elit na Bukowinie podczas II wojny światowej. Proszę.
Dzień dobry. I speak English. Sorry, first of all, my English not very good, but I try to be better when I read my reference. I show you my presentation and I explain something about this presentation, about this photo. First of all, you can see in first page two photos, two different photos, because I talk about two different situations with Jewish authorities, with Jewish community in period of Second World War. First of all, you see poor, you see famine, you see young men after Transnistria, and you see rich Czerniowcy Jews in period when exists ghetto, when exists forced labor system, and it's in 1943. We have two different situations, and I talk about this. First of all, I want to imagine what happened before 1941. The history of the region took tragic turn with terrible consequences for the Jewish community during the interwar period, during the time when Bukovina became the part of the Great Romania. The gradual decline of the economy, combined with Romanian government's sponsored anti-Semitism, were two most decisive factors that shaped the life and destiny of the Jewish community of the Bukovina in the upcoming years. Sorry, I forget about. It's you can see a photo about when July August 1941 when in Czerniowcy was and Bukovina was reoccupied by Romanian and German army, but first of all I return. First of all, I want to show you this archive documents. It's statistic information about Jewish community, about Jewish community before Second World War and after events of Holocaust. And you can see. Sorry. You can see this map. It's statistic situation of Jewish community after deportation and after killing company. Before Second World War, in Bukovina live more of 100,000 Jewish people, and after deportation and mass killing company, we have no more than 20,000 people who survive. First of all, we must talk about Soviet invasion. Soviet invasion and annexion of the North Bukovina in the summer of 1914, followed by confiscation of the private enterprises, ban on the activity of the Jewish organization, and deportation to Siberia only worsened socio-political situation of the Jewish community. At the time of the Nazi invasion in June of 1941, the network and leadership of the Jewish community has been completely destroyed. First of all, I must to say about first period of Sovietization Bukovina in 1940-1941. Part of leaders of Jewish community maintain Soviet power, Soviet power and Red Army, and it will be cause in future in Romania, Romanian army. Why Romanian authorities, why Romanian leaders, Ion Antonescu and leader of Bukovina, governor of Bukovina, Corneli Kalotescu, produce laws, anti-Semitic laws, and say that all Jews of Bukovina, all Jews, it's communist, it's Soviet Jews. And we have problem with this situation because we don't know exactly how many Jews was deported in this period and how many Jews leave Bukovina. But following the Nazi invasion into the Soviet Union in summer 1941, Bukovina region was properly reoccupied by the Romanian troops, and during the July-August 1941, the German and Romanian authorities carried out wide-scale campaign of terror, killings, and humiliation of the Jewish population of the region, followed by the wave of arrests and incarceration in the prisons and transit camp. In Bukovina exists only transit ghetto and transit camp. Why I say only transit? Because this camp and these ghettos exist only in period when produced deportation three wave of deportation. The establishment of the Czerniowcach ghetto with more of 15,000 Jews became another milestone in the repressive policy directed against Jewish population by the military and civil authorities of Romania. The fascist leadership of Romania, using context of war with the help of the local authorities, police and collaborators, first of all in village Ukrainian collaborators, was conducted a policy of ethnic purification by killing and deporting thousands of Jews from the northern Bukovina and Bukovina in general to Romanian controlled territory in the southwest Ukraine between river Dniester and Buk, which became known under the name Transnistria. In 1941-1942, during the three waves of deportation, no less than 75,000 Bukovinian Jews were deported to Transnistria via several transit camps and ghettos. In Bukovina exist three transit camps. It's Sokiriani, it's Jedinci, and Markuleshti. And this transit camp destroyed after end of deportation. Most of them never come back to Bukovina. Most of Jewish people never come back to Bukovina. I talk about, first of all, about Jewish people, Jewish community of a small village, small city, shtetl in Bukovina. And we talk about Bloody summer of 1941, because in September 1941, all cities and small cities and village was cleaning and cleaning of Jewish people, and in this way deciding Jewish questions in Bukovina. However, the history of the Bukovinian Jews also had its own unique story. As a result of personal intervention of the mayor of Czerniowcach, Trojan Popovich, it's a document about Czerniowcach ghetto. It's article in local press, and it's official document program about October 11, day when compose Czerniowcach ghetto, and you can see what must do Romanian troops, Romanian gendarmerie in this date, 11 November, at 7 o'clock to a.m. to 6 p.m. In this day. This leader of city, it's in Romanian traditional primar, leader of city, primar, Traian Popovich, saved more than 20,000 Jews, mostly craftsmen and skillful workers, as well as the members of their families managed to stay in town throughout the war. Unfortunately, many thousand Bukovinian Jews did not return to their homes, and were amount to 270,000 Romanian and Ukrainian Jews who perished in Transnistria. Those who managed to survive mass execution, famine, and epidemic of typhus come back to Bukovina only for a brief period, after policy of Sovietization in the region immediately followed by the mass immigration to the East Europe, Northern America, and Israel. First of all, it's a document with signing of Traian Popovich. When we see how many people stay in Czerniowcach and why these people stay in Czerniowcach. First of all, I want it's photo about Czerniowcach ghetto, and it's document who have these people, Czerniowcach Jews, and who can stay in Czerniowcach, and these people use like in a system of forced labor. And I want to focus your attention about this situation around Czerniowcach. In Czerniowcach exists the biggest ghetto in Bukovina, and this ghetto existed from the 11 October till 15 November 1941, and after two waves of deportation in 1941-1942, in this ghetto and in Czerniowcach survived more of 14,000 people, Jewish people. However, due to the efforts of the mayor of Czerniowcach, Traian Popovich, the financial power of Jewish establishment in Czerniowcach, the bribery amount the Romanian militaries and civil officials, and for the support of economic stability in Bukovina and by the Romanian occupation, power left over 16,000 of Jews in Czerniowcach, and formed Jewish council, Jewish community with leader, first of all, Dr. Neighbor, Otto Plisner, and Mark Fisher. It was leader of this community in different years, 1941, 1942, 1943. Mainly the important specialists were left with a purpose of using them in forced works on benefit Romanian state and army. This document, these cards, and have name authorization, and these people every month must be controlled and registered, and you can see how look forced labor. It's cleaning street of Czerniowcach. It's forced labor's area of Czerniowcach. You can see one of order about Czerniowcach Jews who use like in system of forced labor in Czerniowcach in 1941, 1942, and it's a list of this specialists. It's many specialists. It was engineer. It was doctors. It was drivers. It was I see documents when Germany ambassade in Czerniowcach use mechanic and drivers, Jewish mechanic and drivers, and compose documents about this, and only military authorities and only military bureau, cabinet, office, military office in governments of Bukovina have love and power to use Jewish workmen, Jewish people in Czerniowcach, and Romanian businessmen, Romanian army very quickly came rich after this situation, because it's free workers, and it's authorization. It's another document about these people. You can see signing of Trojan Popovich again. What happened with people who was deported in Transnistria? Bukovian Jews who deported in Transnistria lived in a township, shtetl and village of the Bukovina, and which experienced total pogroms in summer 1941, total deportation to Transnistria in autumn 1941. They experienced serious losses as a result. In particular, it's necessary to examine in details the chronology and persecution and deportation of Bukovian Jews to Transnistria, but I don't have time. Social and psychological adaptation of the Bukovian Jews in Transnistria, their experience and methods of survival in the ghettos, relationship between Romanian Jews and local Ukrainian Jews. First of all, I want to say about leader of Jewish community in Transnistria, and in 90% leader, this leader
Excuse
was...
me, Dr. Surovtsev, you have 5 minutes,
Okay.
and can you focus on this leader as a case, as an example?
Example, it's Adolf Gershman, leader of Żmerinka. It's Meir Taich, leader of Shargorod, and it was Bukovinian Jews. It was advocate. It was doctor, and Bukovinian Jews very quickly save many people, make system of medicine, and try to help many people. So you can see how look life in Czerniowcach. It's theater. It's Jewish theater, home theater, and how look life of leadership of Jewish people in Transnistria. It's survivors after Transnistria. We talk about no more or less that than 10,000 people return and survive into Transnistria camp and ghettos. Thank you, and finally, I want to show you archive documents about community, Czerniowcach community. Czerniowcach, its budget of Czerniowcach community in 1942-1943. It's first of all, I published these documents, and you can see that this community was have many was rich and can help to many people in this period. So thank you for the invitation.
I have a question about the Šavlach ghetto. Was there an underground movement there? I think there was. Can you elaborate a little bit about it and about the relationship with the Judenrat?
Ja bym chciał zapytać pana Altskana, który mówił o Szawlach, ponieważ widzimy, no trudno nie zauważyć ogromnego podobieństwa pomiędzy działaniami Jakuba Gensa i Efraima Gensa. Czy panu się wydaje, że trudno tutaj uniknąć takiego myślenia, że ci bracia jakoś tutaj w jakiejś kooperacji działali, albo przynajmniej, no nie wiem, no skądś to podobieństwo musi wypływać, prawda? Czy to podobieństwo wynika właśnie z ich pokrewieństwa, czy to podobieństwo wynika z tego, że po prostu na Litwie no, częściej właśnie w ten sposób myślano? To jest do pana pytanie, natomiast do pana Olega mam pytanie. Czy na Bukowinie wiemy coś tutaj trochę nawiązuję do pytania mojej poprzedniczki, czy wiemy coś, co wiemy na temat reakcji takich, no powiedzmy, prostych ludzi na zagładę, jak wielu z nich na przykład ratowało się ucieczką do lasów, czy do jakiejś partyzantki, czy do jakiejś, no w taki aktywny sposób szukało ratunku i jak? To takie pytanie. I czy wśród nich jest jakaś zauważalna, nie wiem, część inteligencji, czy nie? Czy to są właśnie tylko ci prości ludzie, czy też inteligencja, nie wiem, to coś takiego bym poprosił o odpowiedź.
on? Yeah, okay. First about underground movement. Of course it exists in Szawlach ghetto. I didn't have time to even mention this. Of course, a very interesting situation. The underground organization was run by a brother of the head of the Jewish community. The head of the Jewish Council was Mendel Leibovich. His brother was engineer by training, and he was in charge of underground movement. There is their source, I mean, the major source was the underground movement, of course, testimonies of Holocaust survivors, but there are also information you can find about clandestine meeting which took place in the ghetto with the participation of Zionist youth movement and leadership of the ghetto, where they discussed what to do in case of the liquidation of the ghetto. And of course, there are a few proposals on the table. One of them is a mass escape to the forest, which is immediately declined by the majority of participants because only strong young people can leave ghetto, leaving behind their parents, elderly people, children. So for such close-knit community as Szawlach, this is not an option. Second option which they discuss, and the idea comes from Mendel Leibovich, head of Judenratu, is that when ghetto is liquidated, the underground movement should start fire. And as soon as it starts, there's a chaos in the ghetto, and many people would be able to escape. Of course, this plan even practically didn't bring any fruits because the ghetto was bombed by by Red Army aviation. Half of the ghetto destroyed. They were probably targeting factory, which I already mentioned, but they hit ghetto, and as a result, head of the ghetto is the only victim of this bombardment, is Mendel Leibovich. So it did exist. The name of this organization was Masada, but unfortunately it didn't really, function. And it's immediately answer to your second question about relationship. Since brother was involved, I'm pretty sure Judenrat completely supported this endeavor by, they knew about it and definitely supported. Second question, I really apologize, my Polish still really rough. I'm learning. So the question was, if I understood correctly, relationship between two brothers? Did they were able to communicate during, okay. Here we're going to the family history, and the short answer is not. There was no communication between Jakub Gens and Ephraim Gens. By saying this, there were no exchange of letters or anything, but they knew about each other's positions. This is in the documents. And the only information which, you can find is a testimony, it's in the trial of Ephraim Gens. He was arrested after the war by Soviets, tried as a collaborator. So here you can find information about another brother, Solomon, middle brother, who was deported from Vilna ghetto at the end of the ghetto, during the liquidation of the ghetto. And on his way to Estonia, to Kloga camp, the train stops at Šavlai. And he sent message to his brother, he knew who he is and where he is, to the ghetto. Ephraim came, and this is how Ephraim learned about Jakub's death. It's in Yitzhak Arad book. Solomon is the last person who sees Jakub before he goes to Gestapo. So, but there was no communication. Of course, after the war, Ephraim learned a lot, and I interviewed Jakub's daughter. She lives in the United States. Of course, the whole family knew a lot, but they learned most of this information after the war.
Thank you very much, Dr. Surovtsev.
You got your question? Can you do this in Ukrainian?
I want to ask to Vadim help me.
Yeah.
I give answer in Ukraine, and Vadim translate.
And I will collect my commission tomorrow for translation. Yeah.
Ну, ваше питання я можу розділити на декілька частин. Тобто, як ставилося місцеве населення до єврейської общини, да? Я так правильно?
I'm not as good as our people sitting there. So I can divide your question into two parts. One of them is what was the relationship between local population and Jews?
Так, якщо ми говоримо про ситуацію в селах, містечках, то в значній мірі влітку 41-го року місцеве населення приймало участь в погромах і знищенні.
When we talk about people who were in villages and small towns in Bukovina, local population took active part in mass killings, pogroms.
Але ми маємо і приклади, коли громада села заборонила чіпати наших євреїв, не дала їх депортувати чи вбити.
But we also have cases when the local community, Ukrainian community, were objecting deportation. They called them our Jews. So our Jews are not subject, should not be deported, and they defended some Jewish families.
В місті, в Чернівцях, звичайно, ставлення до єврейської общини було більш толерантним, тому що єврейська община була дуже тісно зав'язана з соціально-економічним розвитком міста. І неможливо було уявити собі жодну галузь без єврейської.
So in Czerniowcz, which was the largest city in the area, the situation was a little bit different because city dwellers were more tolerant. Jews took active part in local economy, and so it was very different from what happened in little places. I mean, little villages and towns.
Із цією проблемою зіткнулася румунська влада, румунська армія, коли війшла сюди влітку 41-го року, і треба відверто...
So this was a problem which Romanian army faced when they entered city in the summer of 1941.
І треба відверто казати про хабарництво, яке в румунській державі, в румунській армії, яке врятувало євреїв в 41-му році.
And one has to openly talk about bribery, open bribery, which existed in the Romanian army, and in many ways this kind of dishonesty, bribery saved many Jews from killing and deportations.
Я в документах знайшов, що за авторизацію, за право залишитися в Чернівцях, платили до 200 тисяч лей, віддавали машини золоті, годинники, квартири і так далі.
So I found documents which prove that in order to receive permission to be exempted from the deportation from Czerniowcz, Jews had to pay 200,000 leis, they had to give their gold watches and other valuable things to remain in Czerniowcz.
І треба бути відвертим, скоріше всього, Трян Попович теж брав хабарі і захищав не безкоштовно.
One has to also openly admit that Mayor Trajan Popovich probably also accepted some bribes and gifts. This is why, you know, so many Jews managed to stay in the city.
Було складено 184 списки по професіям, які потрібні, людей, які були потрібні для румунської армії та держави на той час.
There were about 184 lists of professionals which were essential for the local economy, so people who had to stay in the city in order to maintain economy.
І от щоб попасти в ці списки, багаті фамілії, родини платили. І вони записувалися, могли до 80 до різних списків. Це одна людина могла бути і хорошим інженером, і водієм, і землекопом, і сантехніком, і так далі.
So in order to be listed or get into this list, you know, Jews had to pay, and I mean, you can find the same people in different lists, because one person could be a good engineer, he could be also a good mechanic, you know, so you can find many people in many different lists.
Цих людей можна було використовувати максимально до 3 місяців на примусових роботах. Тобто кожні 3 місяці треба було поновлювати документи. І за право отримати, наприклад, певну кількість єврейських робітників боролися різні підприємства, армія. Це було дуже вигідно для
These exemptions, or this list actually, were only good for 3 months. Every time you have to renew your permission or your ID, and there were many, competition between managers of various factories who will get a certain specialist for his enterprise.
I would like to stop you now, and because question was, what was the way people were trying to survive? And bribery is one way. And the second part of the question was living for partisan units or going to the forest. What about this ways of surviving?
Я тільки маю інформацію, зустрічав про, що в Чернівцях існувало радянське підпілля, єврейське радянське підпілля, організація, яка складалася з понад 100 осіб. І вони організовували, більшість серед них були саме цими робітниками на різних підприємствах, і вони організовували.
I only found information about underground, communist underground, predominantly Jewish underground in the city. As far as I know, and I'm adding on my own behalf, not what Oleg just said, I also studied this region, there were no partisan movement in this area. So even if they escape from the ghetto, they can go to the forest, but there were really nobody there except local peasants who would probably kill them or denounce them. So this is not, Polessia or any other region.
Одинокі приклади є, коли євреї приймали участь в УПА, в збройних загонах УПА, але це виключення більше. Тобто це були лікарі переважно, або перекладачі, або якісь потрібні люди для
There's information about limited, I would say, singular participation of Jews in UPA. I don't need to tell you what is UPA, right? But they were mostly doctors. This is not really proved by any...
And eventually murdered.
Yes, and all of them eventually were murdered.
Потім були складні відносини серед єврейської громади після того, як частина повернулася в Трансністрію, і вони звинувачували тих, що залишилися в Чернівцях, що вони відкупилися, що вони за допомогою грошей фактично врятували себе, але не всіх.
This is very important. There was also huge tension within community between people who returned from Transnistria, repatriated from Transnistria, and those people who remained in the city. Those who came back, of course, accused those who stayed that they were, rich, greedy, they didn't pay enough money to keep their families in town. So this is really important for the history of Czerniowicz community. Okay.
Thank you.
Dziękuję. Dziękuję bardzo Państwu.